Okay, it's Brett Robbins moving on to video number 4 of the first Catilinarian by Cicero. Quam diu quisquam erit, qui te defendere audeat, vives, et vives ita ut nunc vivis, multis meis et firmis praesidiis obsessus, ne commovere te contra rem publicam possis. Quam diu quisquam erit, qui defendere audeat, vives. Quam diu. As long as quisquam erit, there will be someone. As long as quam diu, and obviously the diu is combined with quam, as long, for as long, quisquam erit, as there will be someone who, nothing but a relative clause in the nominative. So quam diu quisquam erit. I'm single underlining these to get across that we're dealing with a nominative pronoun here, quisquam. We're dealing with a future indicative with erit, and then a nominative relative pronoun whose antecedent is quisquam, who audeat might dare te defendere. Now I'm going to do something a little different than you might expect by double underlining te defendere to get across the point that although we might be inclined to think of the infinitive as complementing the verb audeat, dare to do something, how you should really think of it is as a kind of direct object of audeat. To dare what? To dare to play, right, is one way to go. To defend you. The te here being the direct object of defendere rather than the subject accusative. Not who might dare you to defend. That doesn't make any sense logically, but rather to defend you. So here, although when we see these infinitives, we expect the accusative to be the subject usually, in this case, it's the direct object of defendere rather than the subject accusative, which you should pay special attention to here as one of many examples of the initial ambiguity of the identity of the accusative we're dealing with. By the way, to address the one error that was made by the greatest number of people who watched the previous 3 videos, is, strictly speaking, nothing but an accusative of a transitive verb. I eat the sandwich being direct object in the accusative. When you have an ablative object instead, as with the verb utor, that's not strictly speaking a direct object. It is an object. If anything, it's an indirect object, but differently than when there's an indirect object for a verb, say, of giving. I give the gift to the whomever. All right. So that's kind of a minor point in a way, but what it does is it helps to understand the fact that accusative direct objects of transitive verbs function as adverbs. I eat the sandwich. I eat sandwichly. Not to get too corny, but that's what's really going on, isn't it? All right. Well, kind of the same thing here. Vives, you will live. You see? So that's also in the nominative. Oops. As long as there will be someone who might dare to defend you, you will live. Et, thank you, et. What you're doing as a conjunction here is roping off one sentence from another. So in effect, what you have with the et is this. et, and now we move on to this new sentence, vives, ita, ut, etc. So use those helpful conjunctions that let you know you're moving on to a new clause whenever possible, as opposed to those conjunctions that are nothing but linkages in a more microscopic sense of linking items within the same clause. Dogs and cats, for example. And you will live, or shall live. Ita. Ita ut. Thus, so that. This is a correlative construction. You will live such that, and then it follows what it is that is the nature of the way that you will live. And you will live ita ut. So all of that ita ut stuff is really adverbial, no surprise. And you will live what? All this stuff is going to say something about how you will live. Ita ut nunc vivis. Thus, as now you live. Okay? So all of that is, so in other words, syntactically, ita ut nunc vivis is doing nothing different than what it would be if it were something like et vives bene, well, and you live well, and you live, and you will live well. Okay, et vives bene. That's what that would be. So, but instead of bene, you have ita ut nunc vivis. You see how ita ut nunc vivis functions adverbially, no differently than if it were bene instead. Yeah. Now we have an extension of this idea, as you now live. In effect, we are going to qualify the implied to nominative subject of vivis, which within the context of this adverbial clause can be thought of as the nominative subject plus main verb of this adverbial clause. Now we have another participle slash adjective qualifying this implied to. Obsessus, something like impinged upon by. When someone is obsessed with something, it means they can't get away from it. They are, in effect, attacked by it. And it's interesting, you'll see in the commentary that there is an alternate reading of this particular passage. Oppressus, oppressed by. So it gives you some idea of how we should interpret the obsessus. Something like oppressed by multis meis et firmis praesidiis. Okay? By means of. Obsessed, not obsessed, but impinged upon multis meis et firmis praesidiis. All of that being adverbial. Multis meis et firmis praesidiis. By means of my many and firm protections. Right? So impinged upon by means of my many and firm or strong protections. The et here is answering to the multis rather than the meis. The but the complementarity here is saying it's the watches are not only many but also strong, firm, resolute, secure. Okay. Ne commovere te contrarem publicam possis. Lest, and here you have a negative purpose clause. Might as well be ut, syntactically speaking, but it's ne because it's the negation. So lest possis, you are able to move yourself against the Republic. Now, we learned that when the main verb is a verb meaning to be able to, that it functions as a modal verb, and that the infinitive is nothing but a completion of the idea. Lest you are able, what? You are able to whatever. What? Commovere te, move, with the addition of the idea of the cum, move together with yourself, right? So move te, the reflexive pronoun, move yourself contra rem publicam. Okay, so you are able what? To do something. Think of the commovere as answering to the be able, and then the te as the direct object, and contra rem publicam as the adverbial clause. And within that adverbial clause, you have the accusative object of the preposition contra, which takes an accusative. Multorum te etiam oculiet aures non sentientem, sicut ad hoc fecerunt, speculabuntur atque custodient. All right, let's jump right to the verbs. We have futures in third person plural. They will watch and guard. Now, who is they? Or who are they? Oculiet aures multorum. The eyes and ears of the many, even, will watch and guard te, direct object of these transitive verbs, non sentientem. That's where this fits in. So that's going to crack the puzzle for you, but hopefully you allowed this non sentientem to feel a little bit difficult for a second, and then when you place it, it's that much more satisfying. Okay, so will watch and guard you non sentientem, not noticing it, or literally not perceiving it. Okay, so te non sentientem, might as well double underline this as well, although the non is adverbial, strictly speaking. All right, so the subject, oculiet aures multorum, speculabuntur custodient, the two main verbs of the sentence, taking the direct object te, qualified by sentientem and negated by non. Sicut ad hoc fecerunt is parenthetical, just as up to now they did. Just as up to now they did, the eyes and ears of the many will watch and guard you, not perceiving them doing so. See how much is said in sentientem compared to what it takes in English to approximate it? Non sentientem, not perceiving, just doesn't cut it, does it? You need to pretty much say something like not noticing this being the case, or not noticing them doing so. Et enim quid est, Catilina, quodiam plus expectes sineque nos nox tenebris obscurare coetus nefarios, nec privata domus parietibus continere voces coniurationis tuae potest, si illustrantur, si erumpunt omnia. And indeed, what... Okay. Et enim quid est, Catilina, quodiam plus expectes, si. So we'll hold off on the si, on the protasis of a condition forming here. Si neque nox tenebris. Hold off on the si clause and deal with what precedes it. Et enim quid est. And indeed, et enim is et enim. And indeed, quid est, Catilina, quod iam amplius expectes? Thank you for the implied to, because that tells us that the main verb is expectes, and thus that the quid is going to be a direct object, be the direct object of expectes. Quid expectes. It's a relative pronoun. It's an interrogative pronoun. Quid expectes. What do you expect? Quod, relative pronoun, pointing back to quid. Quid est, Catilina, quod. What is there which now further you will expect? So this is also good. The quod is also going to be double underlined in the accusative. And strictly speaking, I misspoke, and I'm going to keep the error in here just so you get a sense of how easy it is to make it. Etinem quid est, Catilina, quod. Strictly speaking, the quod is the direct object of expectes. Quod is, not quid, right? What is there, Catilina, quod iam amplius expectes, which you will expect? Okay, so rather than delete what I said earlier, do understand that by not taking the quod relative pronoun answering to the referent quid into consideration, I jumped the gun and immediately considered quid to be the direct object of expectes. Do not make the same mistake. What is there, Catiline, which you will expect now further? Okay. If, so what is there that you will expect further? Si neque nos tenebris obscurari quietus nefaris nec pruvat. Okay, what I like to do, I want to hold off on the si illustrantur or si erupunt omnia, which is going to kind of continue with this si idea. So let's deal with this sentence by breaking it up into three parts. The part we already did, and now we go on to this. If neither a, and then we're going to look for a main verb, si neque nox tenebris obscurae. If neither nox, unambiguously nominative, correct? Nominative, correct? So that's going to be the subject of some main verb in the third person singular, which is going to be potest, correct? Now, as above, when we were dealing with posse in this sentence, ne commovere te conterim publicam possis, so down here, when you have a verb meaning to be able to, we're going to expect a so-called complementary infinitive. And I should maybe not be so cynical and say so-called. It really is. That's what we did up here when we single underlined commovere. It complements the verb to be able to do something, right? So you are able to go somewhere. That complements the idea of being able to. Same thing down here. So that raises the question, what is the infinitive answering to this potest? Knight is able, obscurare, to hide. Coetus nefarios, thanks to the os, it's an unambiguous accusative plural. And then coetus, by deduction, should also be understood to go with it as an accusative, and thus the direct object of obscurare, to hide nefarious meetings, comings together. All right. Nec privata domus, we have a nominative subject of the same potest, nor privatidomus, nor is a private home able to contain complementary infinitive going with potest, voces coniurationis tuae, double underline because accusative, direct object of contenere, to contain the voices, your voices, to contain the voices of your conspiracy. All right. So if neither A nor B is possible, and then we move on to the next two C clauses. If neither A, the knight, is able, potest, to hide, to obscure the nefarious meetings, tenebris, by means of shadows, by means of darkness, using shadows metaphorically here. Nor if a private home is not, nec, able, potest, to contain the voices of your conspiracy by means of walls. So we have ablative of means for both complementary infinitives agreeing with potest, to obscure by means of tenebris, to contain by means of walls. By now you have surely come to appreciate what a fan Cicero is of binary contrasts, or at least groupings. Si illustrantur, si erumpunt omnia, if all things, we have by process of elimination to be the subject of the verb, all things come to light, and if they break out. So we go back to the beginning here, and indeed, what is it that you will expect further if neither this nor that occurs, if this does occur, if this does occur, if all things this and this. You see that? So we have, so what will you expect if A and B do not happen, or not able to happen? And what do you do if A and B are happening, which is indeed the situation, as Catiline sits in the Senate listening to Cicero attack him in front of his peers, that will eventually lead to Catiline running out of the Senate and out of town, self-exiling himself along with conspirators to avoid the results accruing to Cicero's actions, which are by far the most famous of those in his long career as a senator and an advocate. All right, now we move on to the last two portions. All right, muta iam istam mentem mihi crede obliviscere caedis atque incendiorum. Muta iam istam mentem. Where's our verb? Crede mihi? No. That's a parenthetical statement. Believe me. You could say, as we do in English all the time, believe me, blah, 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 blah. That's adverbial. Muta is going to be our verb, and it's in the imperative mood. Change now, istam mentem. That mind, literally, but it really means that perspective, that way of looking at things, that purpose. Obliviscere, another imperative. It looks weird because it's a deponent. So forget about caetis atque incendiorum. Caetis, on first impression, may look like either a dative or an ablative plural, but that would be caetibus. It's nothing but a genitive singular, and incendiorum is a genitive plural. And they're genitive because of something you should know from first year Latin, that this verb, obliviscor, takes the genitive as its object. So whereas utor takes the ablative as its object, obliviscor takes the genitive as its object. As its direct object, no, because direct objects are always accusative objects of transitive verbs. But serving as a kind of direct object, yes. And that's why you can label it as an object of the verb without calling it a direct object, but understanding that what it has in common with a legitimate direct object, a strictly speaking accusative direct object of a transitive verb, is the very idea of being linked with the verb by means of its objectness, if you will. Okay. So what are we going to do with it? I'm going to put it in brackets as adverbial material, but with the understanding that for obliviscere to stand by itself, forget. Well, you could imagine someone saying that to someone imperatively. Forget. Don't bother. Don't bother. Now there's an implication, forget it. And it's the it that would be elliptical, left out, just as we would be doing here if we left out the caetis atque incendiorum. Do understand, however, that the tenuousness of the fact that we have caetis atque incendiorum in brackets rather than double underlined as if it were a direct object is somewhat arbitrary. You see, the important thing is its relationship to the verb. Teneris undique. You are held, present passive of teneo. You are held from every side. You are held on every side. You are held everywhere. Luce sunt clareare nobis tua consilia omnia. All of your counsels are, verb, what? Clearer to us, adverbial. Think about it, even though it's a pronoun. It's the case that it's in the dative that makes it adverbial, no less than if it were I give the gift to you, and I can just say I give the gift. And then the to you would be adverbial, well, it would be a direct object. Then light. Here's a beautiful example of an ablative of comparison. Right? Are. All your counsels are clearer to us than light. Quae. Now, what is the quae relative pronoun pointing back to? Your counsels. All of your counsels, which now, adverbial, temporal, with me, prepositional phrase, thus adverbial. It is permitted that you recognize. Okay, so which now with me, it is permitted for you to recognize. We have a hortatory subjunctive here with the recognoscas. So notice again, we have a supposedly impersonal verb it is permitted. But the it is really now with me that you recognize which things, all of that, in effect, is the subject of licet. Qua iam me cum recognoscas serves in the same capacity to licet as if it were something like licet to do something in the infinitive. To do something is permitted. Or that you do something, in which case it would be, as here in the subjunctive, is permitted. Do realize that what we have here is nothing different than that, syntactically speaking. The only thing that makes it tricky is the quae, the identity of the quae as a relative pronoun. And so it makes it more sloppy to be able to think of qua iam me cum recognoscas as a kind of subject of licet. But if you put your mind around it, I think you'll understand that those four words around licet are functioning no differently than if it were licet esse bonum. To be a good person is permitted. Esse bonum licet. You see how in that case it's more obvious that licet is not a so-called impersonal verb. This really is a pet peeve of mine. There's no such thing as an impersonal verb. Every verb has a subject. Do you see that? Okay. Now on to our last part. It's just tagging on, really a noun. Do you not remember me 12 days ante diem, 12 days before the calends, that is the first day of November? Do you not remember me to say, me, double underline, dicere, to get across the point that what it is I'm asking if you, with an implied to, remember is me dicere something. Me to say. To say what? That's a different point. Me to say that Gaius Manlius, which we will double underline in that special way that gets across that it's a double underlining of a double underlining. Fore, futurum esse is what fore means here. And that bears serious scrutiny if you're not clear on how it does, because it's a combination of futurus esse, and in this case it would be futurum esse, because it qualifies manlium, which is in the accusative. And why is that? Well, it goes back to what it is you remember me saying. Okay, so before we deal with by far the most complex construction we have today, let's get rid of some adverbial stuff to make things easier on us. The whole phrase dealing with when me dicere, when I say something, just means 12 days before the first day of November. Do you not remember me to say on this date in the Senate to say what? Not to say something directly quoted like, yay, which is possible. Do you not remember me to say, yay, in the Senate? No, it's more complex than that. To say what? To say Gaius Manlius to be about to do something. Okay? And that's where the Gaiumanlium fore comes in. But before we get to what it is, that I'm wondering whether you remember me saying in the Senate that Gaius Manlius would do, let's get rid of the adverbial material surrounding this idea. In armis, easy, in arms, certo die, on a certain day, qui dies futurus esset ante diem. Okay, so all of this stuff is going to be adverbial, no less than this temporal clause was. Although now it's a little fancier with certo die, on the certain day, which day futurus esset was about to be 6 days before the first day of November, which is 6 days later than the day that I warned you in the Senate that I'm asking about whether or not you remember. What you have is a positive clause qualifying the identity of Gaius Manlius. The satellitem, the satellite or attendant and helper, tuae audaciae. Right? So all of that is nothing but a further qualification of the identity of the one I warned you about. And finally, num, whether, or surely not, fefellet me, fooled me, or deceived me. Catiline. Atroxo, non modo, verum id quod. We have a correlative construction, not only this, but also that. Whether, Catiline, you think that not only this, but also that deceived me? Do you really think that? So all we need to do now is provide the values fulfilling the subject of fefellet. Not only res tanta, tamatrox tam que incredibilis, which is one big nominative. Verum, but, or in truth, also implied, the day, the very day. So whether Catiline A, not only so great a thing, tam atrox tamque incredibilis, so atrocious and incredible, but also the very day, id quod multo magis est admirandum, that which by far more is to be admired. That's the literal translation. See if you understand that. Id quod multo magis est admirandum. So, but the day, and then the id through admirandum is going to qualify day. That which much more to be admired is, to be paid attention to be wondered at, to be amazed at. So do you think that the thing, so great a thing itself, or the day of it, has deceived me? No, I know what you're up to, you and your fellow conspirators. And now Cicero is going to move on to some specifics, some particulars about the Catiline situation that are going to eventually run Catiline out of the Senate to escape Rome, to avoid being preemptively assassinated.